Okay, great. Welcome to the final class in our 12-part series on the paths, letters, and correspondences. So it's been a long haul, but yeah, no, it's been great. And yeah, all right, so here we go. So we've just got one letter left. This is the last letter of the alphabet, Tav. And it is no coincidence that as the last letter in the alphabet, some of its symbolism is about finality and about completion. So it'll work very nicely, I think, as a kind of capstone to the series. Obviously as just the final letter in the Hebrew alphabet, it gains a lot of that symbolism. So that's very nice. All right, so there's Tav there. You could maybe confuse it with like the letter Hey or the letter Heth, but it's that really big kind of left foot it's got there that's so distinctive of Tav. And you can see it's written in just two strokes. So the top bar and then like the right leg, that's all just one stroke, unlike some of the other similar looking letters where you can see that the top bar and like the right leg are two separate strokes. You can actually see this. You basically got like if you were to cut out the left leg, it would basically be the same as the Hebrew letter Resh. And Lon Milo Duquette in his chicken Kabbalah, I think, the first one, he describes the letter Tav as looking like the letter Resh holding a dead dolphin by the tail. I think you can't quite see that quite as much in this font, but in some other fonts, it really looks like it. And so I'll never forgive Lon for just planting that into my head. And I probably think about that every time I look at the Hebrew letter Tav now. Which is great, that he's able to, come up with these images that really help people remember things, even if later you might curse him for it. Anyways, the hieroglyph and Phoenician letters here are interesting. So the original hieroglyph was probably this Egyptian kind of X shape, which was crossed sticks. And it was used to mean like an owner's mark. I couldn't find exactly like in what circumstance it would be used. I thought maybe it was for like branding cattle or something like that. I'm not sure. But yeah, so meaning like a mark. It can also be used as a tally mark. And then it's also used in Egyptian as a determinative, which is just a kind of symbol that isn't like directly part of a word, but tells you, or part of like a hieroglyph. It's part of the hieroglyph, but it's not like pronounced. It just tells you like which category of things you're dealing with. So anyways, that becomes just a Phoenician letter of the same shape, though sometimes it's written rather like as an X, more as an upright cross there, and that also means mark. So its sound as a double letter, it has a double sound. So this varies a lot by dialect, especially in modern Hebrew dialects. I think is it Ashkenazic, I think? It often has like an S sound, but for our purposes, what you want to know is that the hard sound, again, double letter have a hard and a soft sound. So the hard sound is like the plosive sound T, and then we have the soft TH. And this is our soft TH. When we talked about Daleth, we distinguished it between like the hard TH and soft TH. So this is like the TH in words like thing or think. That's the soft TH. And so our English equivalent is just TH, which is how you'll see it. And it's important to distinguish that against teth, which is just usually transliterated as T. All right, so it has a value of 400. Now this value is quite significant and really ties into some of the symbolism of the letter. 400 is a number showing like completion and totality. And there's different ways that we could approach that, but one of the main is that the idea that you have the tree of life with the 10 Sephiroth. And so there's an idea that within each of the Sephiroth, there's also an entire tree. So you've got 10 times 10 is 100. And then there's also the idea about the four worlds. And then you have an entire tree in each one of the four worlds. So 10 times 10 times 4 is 400. So this is the entire tree within each Sephiroth, within each of the four worlds. And so it just represents, completion, totality, everything. And we'll see that going forward, that idea. All right, so spelled in full, it's spelled Tav Vav, which sums to 406. Not a super important word. It's the sum of the numbers of 1 through 28. 28 is an interesting number to look into, and then so you can kind of make a connection between some of the words for the value 28 and then some of the symbols of here, something you can look into. Now, in our tradition, we say that this letter means cross. Now, that's not quite what the hieroglyphic origin means, where it means more like mark. But obviously, it comes from a symbol which is quite literally a cross. So that's how we get our meaning cross, and that's the way that the symbol is employed in Hermetic Kabbalah, is to mean cross. Now, as an actual Hebrew word, tav vav means mark, and then sometimes mark in the sense of signature. I think that like Job uses in the book of Job, he says something about like, here's my mark or my like attestation or my signature, and that's the word tav. All right, so then, so I just want to show you this from Ezekiel because it's relevant to the 32 path of wisdom here, 32 paths of wisdom. So this is part of a vision that Ezekiel is having here. So he says, now the glory of the God of Israel went up from above the cherubim where it had been and moved to the threshold of the temple. Then the Lord called to the man clothed in linen who had the writing kit at his side and said to him, go through the city of Jerusalem and put a mark, that's tav, on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over all the detestable things that are done in it. Now, these detestable things are idol worship. Ezekiel, just before this, or I guess I think it's in chapter 8, Ezekiel has had a vision of idol worship taking place in Jerusalem, like some of the elders, each worshiping their own idol with incense, women there mourning the god Tammuz. And then finally, and most horrifically of all, you have a group of people, a group of Israelites with their backs turned to the temple, who are bowing down in worship to the rising sun. Horrors, right? Okay, so continuing on here, he says, as I listened, he said to the others, follow him through the city and kill without showing pity or compassion. Slaughter the old men, the young men and women, the mothers and children. Do not touch anyone who has the mark. Begin at my sanctuary. So they began with the old men who were in front of the temple. And so obviously there's a kind of echo back to Exodus, right? And the mark, the lamb's blood, that's put over the door. Although that doesn't use the word tav, when the angel of death, the final plague and all that. But anyways, this idea of like the mark and specifically being associated with idol worship is relevant for our paths of wisdom here. All right, so I'm going to read these in the opposite order. I think that'll make more sense. So Kaplan's, more accurate scholarly translation of the path of wisdom is 32. So this is the 32nd path and the final path, right? 32, worshipped consciousness. It is called this because it is prepared so as to destroy all who engage in the worship of the 7 planets. But then Westcott renders it as, the 32nd path is the administrative intelligence, and it is so called because it directs and associates the motion of the 7 planets, directing all of them in their own proper courses. So Westcott has actually changed the meaning of the phrase, not just translated it, but he's made it relevant to, he's kept, this association with the 7 planets, but made it relevant and appropriate for the Hermetic tradition. The idea that worshiping the 7 planets is a kind of deadly sin, which requires that people be destroyed, just doesn't make any sense in our tradition, obviously. But he's kept the connection to the 7 planets. So I just thought that was something interesting to notice, the way that he's kept some of the core significance, but completely changed the intention around that. And so obviously in this situation, although Kaplan's translation is more technically accurate, it's Westcott's that actually is useful for our purposes. All right, and so here it is, the final path on the tree of life. In the lowest path, it connects Malkuth to Yesod. As such, it gains a lot of initiatory significance. The movement from Malkuth to the Yesod is one of the most important stages in initiatory paths, like in the Golden Dawn-based order or in the AA. In the AA, it represents a higher level of attainment, the move from like the world of Asaya to the world of Yetzirah. And so, this is an extremely important path in initiatory systems. And also a path of obstacles and difficulties, as we'll see with its attributions. All right, so again, like Sheen we saw last time, we're going to have a double attribution. Something I didn't mention last week when we looked at Sheen was why it was appropriate to kind of double up the attributions for fire and spirit, particularly. hopefully it's sort of intuitively obvious, but in the four elements, fire is definitely the closest to to the meaning of spirit. It's the most immaterial. It has there's a sense in which fire is always pure, right? You can't like mix fire with anything else like you can with the other elements. Fire is always just fire, and yeah, I mean, fire is used in a lot of spiritual symbolism. So it makes so fire is already in a way very close to spirit. So it makes sense to double up on that. And we can talk a little bit about some of the logic of the doubling here as well, since it's a little bit different, though similar in a way. Though Sheen, we saw it was like two elements doubled up into one path. Now we're going to have an element and a planet doubled up. So for just our main path here, like if you're looking in 777, just the path number 32, this is to the planet. This is to Saturn. And of course, as a double letter, this is our main attribution to a double letter, is the planet. All right, so we got the planet Saturn. And we'll talk about some of the symbolism of Saturn as we go along, but definitely, like heaviness, darkness, restriction, time, limitations, death, old age. All of these things are associated with Saturn. Structures, hardness. In the body, Saturn's often associated with the bones. The hard, inflexible structure of things, which isn't always pleasant, but obviously it's necessary. If your bones weren't in your body, you would be in a lot of trouble. All right, so its magical weapon is the sickle. Now this is associated with the god Saturn. Also, Saturn, especially traditionally, is also associated with agriculture and with the harvesting of grain specifically. So not so much like the blooming and blossoming of new life, but the harvesting of grain, which is, I think we've maybe talked about this already in this class, that it's killing. When you harvest grain or any kind of food, you're destroying that thing, but it's not a negative thing to harvest grain, right? And that is, especially for a lot of ancient civilizations, grain and cereal grains are the foundations of your civilization. What keeps you going. So yeah, really important and important for life. So the sickle has this idea of harvesting, also of cutting off and cutting short. And Saturn represents, again, these ideas of limitations, especially the limitation of mortality, that the amount of time that we have. And Saturn's also associated with time, which we'll talk about a little more. The amount of time that you have is limited, and eventually your life will be cut off, by death. All right, so in the tarot, this is the final of the major arcana. This is Atu 21, the universe. Now, obviously, there are 22 arcana, but we start with 0 with the Fool, so 21 is the final. All right, for perfumes or incense, we have asafoetida, which is normally used in cooking, but can also be used as an incense. It smells terrible. I have a bunch of asafoetida that I've used for like some Saturn workings. It's not a pleasant smell, and it's also very, very difficult. It really, really lingers. I remember, I put a big cloud of it up in the air, and the room smelled like asafoetida for, I don't know, close to 2 weeks. I was burning like all clouds and clouds of frankincense and other things to try to get rid of it, but it really, really lingered. So just be aware of that. All right, also scammony, which is another kind of foul-smelling incense. Indigo. Indigo is an interesting, this is the plant indigo, the same plant that's actually used to make like indigo dye. It can be, I'm not sure exactly what, it's processed in a certain way, and then you can burn it. It doesn't really have much of an odor, but the smell it gives, or the color of the smoke is this kind of saturated, like blue indigo color. So this is an interesting one. It's it's categorized as a perfume or an incense, but it's actually because of the color of the smoke. So that's an interesting thing. Though the smoke is not good for you. So if you are going to use it, you need to do it in a well-ventilated place. Sulfur can also be attributed here, which is another very foul-smelling incense. I was part of a group ritual working where we were doing a kind of an invocation of Baphomet and using sulfur as as a Saturnian incense, but more specifically for Capricorn. We used sulfur, which was unpleasant but effective. Just powdered sulfur. It smells like rotten eggs. It's quite foul. And then all evil odors. And Crowley says in 777, he talks about evil here means, the the sense of being like limitation and unpleasantness, rather than, we're not talking about anything moral. Excuse me. We're not talking about any kind of moral evil here. All right, so then for magical powers, we have works of malediction and death. Yeah, we've already talked about death. In traditional astrology, Saturn is considered one of the malefics, right? Which again isn't a kind of moral evil. It's just unpleasant. And it's sometimes, it's necessary for life, but too much of it can be, hostile to life. For our metal, we have lead. Lead is obviously very heavy, dense, black in color. It's also toxic. And we'll see more toxic things associated with Saturn. All right, so here's our color scales for Saturn here. All right, so we've got, for Absolute and the King scale, we've got indigo, part of the division of the spectrum, into 7 parts. And then for the Queen scale, for Bria, we've got black. And Crowley in 777 notes that this is the black of Binah. Binah is the sphere of Saturn and is also associated with the color black. And Crowley talks about the Binah being like the perfection of Saturn, that Binah is like Saturn in its highest sense. Sometimes Saturn is also associated with Da'ath, the kind of false or illusory Sephira that exists in the abyss, which we just don't have time to go into here. And then for a Prince scale, we have a combination of indigo and black for blue-black. And in the Princess scale, we've got black again, but now it's rayed blue. And Crowley interprets the rayed blue, the blue raying, as blue is Hokmah in the, is that in the King scale? Yeah, one of the color scales for Hokmah is blue. So he talks about this as kind of representing like the marriage of Binah and Hokmah. All right, so we got some plants here. I'm not going to go through all of these. Let's see, hellebore is it's actually a genus of plants, flowering plants. They're toxic, and they also flower in winter. Right, we say Capricorn and Aquarius are both winter signs, and the kind of Saturn's cold as well. Cold and dry are the qualities associated with Saturn. So a plant that flowers in the winter makes sense for Saturn. A plant that flowers during the dark and cold and generally infertile time of the year. And we also have nightshade, which is really an entire family of plants. Now, not all nightshades are really appropriate here. Some nightshades are edible, things like tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes, at least some peppers. Those are all nightshades, and so they don't really make sense for Saturn. But many nightshades are also toxic. And some of those toxic, like the alkaloids in there, while being very dangerous, can be used as mind-altering substances. So that's, quite a dangerous endeavor that you really need to be an expert in to be able to do safely. And even then, sometimes experts still get killed. And so that's the Datura flower that you see on the left, which is a nightshade that can also be used for, as a consumed substance, though it's quite toxic and dangerous. Kristen was wondering if there are all plants that grow well in shade. I'm not sure about that. That's an interesting question. Yeah, I don't know exactly how that name, nightshade, comes about. But yeah, good question. Good thing to look into. And then also Crowley lists the elm there. It's not in the main tables, but in his notes, he mentions elm and says that elm is good or appropriate here for 2 reasons. One is, I don't know how true this is, but Crowley says that the elm is notorious for suddenly dropping its branches and killing people, if it lands on them. So they do kind of sudden death. And he says elm is also wood used in the making of coffins. So kind of double association with death there. All right, and then we have onyx as the stone. Now, black onyx is the most well-known form of onyx, though not actually the most common. So that's black onyx you can see there on the right. For its color and darkness, it's attributed to Saturn. And then for the animal, we have the crocodile, and that's a Nile crocodile that you can see at the bottom there. And the idea of the crocodile here is that it's the devourer. And so Saturn is often pictured as devouring, or kind of devouring everything, right? And that's a way that we can talk about death, right, as consuming all. So the crocodile is appropriate there. All right, and then so for our Greek and Roman deity, now the Greek deity is, well, all right, so the Greek deity Cronus, or Titan actually, Cronus, who's the son of, or one of the children of Gaia and Ouranos, right? Gaia, the kind of primordial powers of the earth and the sky. Cronus, yeah, is one of the children there. And then so Gaia gets Cronus and some of her other children when Ouranos visits her, to have sex. They kind of grab him, and Cronus castrates his father. Then he becomes kind of king for a while as a Titan, and then until eventually he's displaced by his son Zeus. Now Kronos is a personification of time. And so originally these are two distinct entities, the Titan Cronus, and then the personification of time as Kronos. But even in sort of early ancient Greece, I'm not sure exactly when, but into the BC times, there's already an association, possibly a confusion, just because the names are similar, but possibly a kind of conscious, intentional association between the two. And then with like the Roman god Saturn, he not only has the significances of Cronus, but also picks up the significance of time, which we talked about there. Oh, Kristen, were you talking about, I just saw your next comment there. I thought you were talking about just the nightshades in particular. I didn't realize you meant all of the plants that I had listed there. Yeah. Right. Okay. So Saturn has the kind of double association with Cronus, and then also with time there. So that's the Greek Cronus that you can see there on the left. And then on the right, we've got a painting from the wonderful Spanish painter Goya, and this is Saturn devouring his son. Right. So Saturn or Cronus, because he doesn't want, there's a prophecy that he'll be displaced by, just like he kind of displaced his father, that one of his children will displace him. And so as Rhea gives birth to the various gods, Cronus devours them all until eventually Rhea tricks him into thinking that he's the final child, Zeus. She gives him a stone to eat, and then raises Zeus in secret, who then overcomes his father. So this is so this is from one of Goya's late works, the so-called black paintings that he did towards the end of his life, which were done literally on the walls of the house that he was living in. Towards the end of his life, he's in a lot of both physical and mental distress at this time. Anyways, Goya's a wonderful painter, and it really captured really good at capturing like horror. He's got a whole series of prints, of the horrors of war. This is a well-known image of Saturn as devourer, based on an earlier painting by Rubens, I believe. Okay, so now we got our magical hierarchy for Saturn, following the same basic pattern as our other planetary hierarchies. So for Atzluth, we got our divine name. This is Yod He Vav He Elohim. Again, as always, this name is most specifically associated with the sphere of that planet. That would be Binah. You'll see Binah given both Yod He Vav He Elohim and sometimes just Elohim on its own. But this is the kind of full name for Saturn here. All right, and then we have our archangel of Saturn, Zafkiel. And then for Yetzirah, we've got the planetary angel, Cassiel, the planetary intelligence, Agiel, and then our planetary spirit, Zazel. And then finally, for Asaya, for the heaven of Asaya, we have Shabbatai, which is the Hebrew name for the planet Saturn. And I don't know the exact etymological history, but this is connected to Shabbat or Sabbath, the name of Saturday, right, which is Saturn's day, and is the holy day in the Jewish tradition. All right, so now we'll do our secondary attribution. So this would be path 32 bis, right? The secondary attribution for the 32nd path and for Tav. And so, so we got Earth here. Now, this is a little funny because it's an element that's being attributed to one of the double letters. Normally, the elements were attributed to the mother letters, right? But now we've got an element for the double letters. And the reason that this is coming in here is the closeness of a lot of the significations of Saturn to Earth, of being heavy and dull, solid, material, dark. All this stuff is shared by both Saturn and Earth. So it makes sense that we can kind of double up the significations there. All right, so for our magical weapon, we've got the Pentacle or Salt. Now, pentacle here is specifically talking about the Earth pentacle. You can make like pentacles or discs for all kinds of purposes, but we're specifically talking about the elemental weapon here, the elemental weapon of Earth, associated with Malkuth, etc. Now, for salt here, salt sometimes is also paired with bread. These are actually things that are consumed, and Crowley talks about bread and salt being used in initiatory rituals, either to seal an obligation or to nourish the candidate. Salt can also be used alone, but it's very often paired with bread and salt. And so bread and salt together, both appropriate to Earth. Now, bread doesn't really fit into any of the main categories, but bread is also a good association with the path of Tav. Interestingly, it's also appropriate to Saturn as well, right? Because we saw that Saturn was associated with grains and cereal grains, in the harvest and harvesting. So that bread actually kind of works nicely for both meanings of Tav. And we'll talk about salt more in a moment. All right, so for our tarot card, we've got obviously 221, the universe, and now as Earth, we also have all discs and all the princesses in the court cards. So the entire suit of discs, and then also all 4 princesses of each suit. All right, so then for our perfume or incense, we have storax and all heavy and dull odors. So I think I mentioned before when we looked at Mercury that storax is sometimes given to Mercury and to Hode, which I was saying I think then that I was having trouble understanding why that attribution would have been made. But I've learned since that class that storax can be used to dissolve other like fragrances or incenses in, and so it can be a kind of a medium for other things. And so in that sense, it makes a lot of sense for Mercury, right, who's like the messenger, and also is kind of a shape changer and all those sort of ideas of carrying messages, being mutable and transformable. So storax is well, the qualities of the scent itself are maybe more appropriate for for Earth because it's dull and heavy. There is also it's as a medium for other things. It's appropriate to Mercury. Let's see. If you think of, if any of you are familiar with, like Marshall McLuhan's phrase, the medium is the message, which he was using about like new media technology and all that. I think there's something very mercurial about that idea, about the way that something's transmitted, the form of the communication being the message more than its content. Anyways, that's just what it makes me think of. All right, and then for magical powers, we have alchemy, geomancy, and the making of pentacles. Now, the making of pentacles is pretty obvious. Geomancy should also be pretty obvious, right? Geomancy is like divination by Earth. And originally, the geomantic figures and even the way that you generate the geomantic figures was done by making little holes or marks in sand or in earth. So this is kind of earth divination. Now, there are other ways of doing it. You can also do geomancy with dice and things like that, but there's a kind of connection to Earth there. And then also alchemy. I was thinking about alchemy and why this would be appropriate to Earth. And I think it's just the idea of the transformation of materials, and especially the idea that alchemy, the first matter of alchemy is always like either the physical body, the manifest world, and something that's kind of dull and confused and all sort of mixed together as like the raw material of alchemy. And the idea that it's a physical process, even if we also understand it to be also a spiritual process. It's working with material things, whether literally or metaphorically. Okay, so interesting set of color scales here. So we've got two different possible color attributions for the King scale. Now, the one on top is the traditional one, and these are the colors most known as the colors of Malkuth. So this is citrine, olive, russet, and black. These four colors, again, most known as the four colors of Malkuth. They're derived from the sequence of going from like the primary colors, for Sephira 4, 5, and 6, and then red, blue, and yellow, and then for the next triad of Sephiroth below that, Sephiroth 7, 8, and 9, then you have the secondary colors derived from combining the primary colors. So then you get orange, purple, and green. And then finally for Malkuth, you have like the combinations of the secondary colors. So really like citrine, olive, and russet are mixtures of all three primary colors basically, but with a predominance of a different color for each one. So like citrine is a predominance of yellow, olive is a predominance of blue, and then russet is a predominance of red. And then finally black is like the full mixture of all three. All right, but then in the thelemic tradition, we have an alternate color that Crowley gives of green. And so if you look at the bottom there, I've got two quotes. One's from one of the thelemic holy books, Liber Zadi. This is verse 2, and this is the god Horus speaking. Horus, specifically as the Lord of the Aeon. And he says, "I swoop down upon the black earth, and it gladdens into green at my coming." And then Crowley comments in 777 that the pure earth, known to the ancient Egyptians in that equinox of the gods which Isis presided, was green. That's sort of an anachronistic kind of statement about the Egyptians. For the Egyptians, actually, black is the color of fertility, which is something we've talked about, I think, previously in this class. The color of like infertility for Egypt is red because of the desert sands that don't get the Nile flood. But here Crowley is using green like as the color of fertility. And so the idea is that in the new Aeon, in the Aeon of Horus, Earth is no longer seen as just a kind of dead or like static thing, as the waste product of creation or something like that, but as a living and vital thing. So this is a kind of non-dual take on the element of Earth. Earth as a fertile living thing rather than just like dead matter. So you can use either one, for different purposes. All right, and then for the Queen scale, we have amber. For the Prince scale, we have dark brown. I guess the dark brown is the kind of combination of amber with the other color, just sort of a vague idea of the combination of the four colors for the King scale with amber. Amber is an interesting color to look into. We saw that associated with the sun, but the sun kind of in its most material. And there's a lot of ideas that you'll encounter about Earth being a kind of like condensed form of solar energy. Now, obviously, that's literally true in a lot of ways. The Earth. All the energy, on the Earth comes from the sun. All the energy in the food we eat is ultimately solar energy, transformed through plants and maybe through animals as well. So there's this very deep connection between the Earth and the sun. If you listen to there's a recording when I did a local class series here back in like last fall, where we talked about the four elemental weapons. We talked in the class on the disc there. I talked about this kind of relationship between the Earth and the sun. So you could refer to that. And then finally, in the Princess scale, we have black flecked yellow. So all the elemental, the Princess scale for all the elements is always flecked. So again, we have the black of Earth, and then flecked yellow. Yellow is the King scale color of Malkuth. All right, so let's just move on here. All right, so for stones, we have, a mineral, not usually thought of as a stone, but we have salt. And so you can see some salt crystals on the left there. Salt crystals, at least when they're formed so slowly, they actually form into a cube shape. And then you can actually see, I've got a little image there of the actual like molecular structure of salt. Salt is an ionic compound of sodium chloride. And so let's see, the sodium atoms there are, or the sodium ions there are purple, and then the chlorine is green, and they naturally just sort of pack, just because of the properties of those atoms, they pack into these like cube shapes. And so the cube is a symbol of the element of earth. Now this comes through, I think, most originally through like the five Platonic solids. The cube is one of those, and they're associated with the elements, and so the cube is associated with the element earth. Yeah, and we saw some of that symbolism, like when we talked about the emperor, like sitting on the cube. You'll see cubes used as earth. Though interestingly, cubes sometimes also, like in alchemical contexts, or even sometimes like in masonry, they can represent like the finished alchemical product. Something taken and processed, nature, taken and processed and perfected. So there's another kind of interesting double coincidence of like, the highest and the lowest, the beginning and the end, which is a logic we've seen a bunch of times in different contexts throughout this class. All right, and so for animals, we have the bull, who's the cherub of earth. Now, obviously, we saw the bull previously in for the letter Vav, for Taurus, which is the cherubic sign of Earth, and so that's why we're kind of doubling up on it, because the cherub is appropriate both to the element as well as to the cherubic sign of that element. And something you could do. I'm going to make all these slides available to members, so you can have them all to look through. Like just the compilation of these like 22 letters that we've gone through in detail. And so something you could do is look through and find places where the same animal or plant or stone or whatever occurs in multiple contexts, and then think about why that might be. Sometimes it'll be because there's just a very like with the bull example there. There's a very, very direct overlap. But sometimes an animal or a symbol or a god participates in two different symbols. And so it's interesting to kind of work out some of the logic. We saw the eagle appear a bunch of times for different reasons. The eagle attributed to Kaf, as the bird of Jupiter. Eagle also, for air, for Aleph, eagle for Aquarius. And yeah, they all have kind of related meanings of sky and air and the heavens, but not always exactly the same. So that's just sort of interesting, project that you could work on, is look at where there's overlapped or shared meanings between paths, and then think about, why that might be and what the relationship between those paths are. All right, and then for plants, we have oak. That's a picture of an oak tree there. The oak wood is very hard, and oak trees are big and tall and heavy. Ivy is an interesting one. Crowley seems to be associating ivy with the idea of like a maiden, and the maiden or a young woman is often associated with Malkuth. These are the ideas of the Shekinah and things like that. The magical image of Malkuth is a young woman, sort of crowned and veiled, I believe. Yeah, and then also wheat here as well, or I think he even says like all cereal grains, which I think we've already talked about why that's appropriate. All right, for a Greco-Roman deity, we have Demeter, her Greek name, or Ceres, or Ceres, her Roman name. I didn't list it here, but Gaia as well could be attributed here, and really any kind of earth, deity would be appropriate to this path. A lot of you are probably already familiar with some Demeter's mythology. Not just now. Gaia is the kind of like primordial, power of Earth, whereas Demeter is more like agriculture and the fertility of the Earth. A few steps closer to like human civilization. Which is one of the things that distinguishes the gods from the Titans. The gods are a little bit sort of closer, to the human world or something like that, I guess you could say. And there's her daughter Persephone, of course, is kidnapped and taken to the underworld. Kidnapped by Pluto, taken to the underworld, and then because of Demeter's like mourning, that's a kind of mythological connection to the seasons and why the Earth is only fertile at some times of the year because of Demeter's mourning. Or Hades, of course, is Pluto's Greek name. Right. So here we got our magical hierarchy for Earth. And so this is a sort of normal elemental hierarchy. And like the elemental hierarchy for spirit we saw was pretty weird and wasn't a conventional hierarchy at all. But now this is much closer to what we saw for fire, water, and air. So for our divine name, we have Adonai. Adonai is a divine name often used for Malkuth, sometimes in combination with other names like Adonai Haaretz. Adonai means Lord. It's also used by like observant Jews as a stand-in for the unpronounceable name of Tetragrammaton. Like they'll say Adonai instead, where it'll be Yod He Vav He, but they'll say Adonai as like a replacement for that. And Adonai Haaretz would be like Lord of the earth, Aretz, and actually we'll see that as just at the bottom here. So the archangel of the quarter there is Uriel. Sometimes you'll see Uriel's name spelled A-U-R-I-L, but it's pronounced Uriel. And that's, the archangel that you're invoking in the lesser ritual of the pentagram in the north, the archangel of earth in the north. And for Yetzirah, we have the angel of the element, Forlach, the ruler of the element, Cherub, and then the king of the elemental spirits, Gob. And for our heaven of Messiah, we have Aretz, which is means earth. It can also mean like the earth is the element. Now I think the idea of like Adonai Haaretz, the Lord of the earth. That's like the earth as the planet. Though Aretz can also mean land in the sense of a specific land. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. I always took that to be like the world. You have newspapers named like the Globe or when a big French newspaper, Le Monde, the world, right? I took it to be in that sense, though I guess actually the idea is specifically that the land of Israel that's being referred to there. But for our purposes, Aretz means either the element of Earth or like the planet Earth. And we'll see the name Adonai appear again after in some of the summary material we're going to do in just a little bit. All right, so this is from one of the versions of the Marseille deck. I just wanted to remind you of what the traditional image of the card looked like, and then we can see how it gets transformed in the Thoth card. All right, so we see we've maintained the four cherubs in the corners, so referring to the four elements. And one of the significances of Earth is also as not just one of the four elements, but also the combination of the other three. So there's the idea that fire, water, and air kind of combined together and then like crystallized or materialized produces Earth. So Earth also has the sense of combining the other four. We have a similar kind of idea with the cross-shaped, right? The cross shape, obviously, especially an equal-armed cross has four arms that can represent, the four elements, and also the extension of the center point. So the idea of Earth as like the extension of spirit, or the full and complete extension. So again, some of these ideas of completion and fullness. So we see the cherubs in the corners there. And then let's see, what else have we got going on here? At the very bottom of the card, it almost looks like some kind of weird architectural diagram or something like that. What that actually is an old diagram. It's not used anymore, but was an old diagram of the chemical elements. I think there was only 90-something elements known at the time. And so the symbolism, the reason that Crowley's putting it in here is as, the chemical elements as like the most basic and fundamental part of the physical universe, the cosmos that we live in. And the change of the name from the world to the universe really isn't a change in meaning. World, often, like mundus or whatever in Latin, then often means like cosmos, not just like the planet Earth, but, the spheres of the planets and the fixed stars as well, the entire like created realm. Though we do now know that that's much, much larger and more extensive than it was previously known to be. And so Crowley's change of name, I think, is just to keep up with the changing, like meanings and significances of words, that it really represents the entire cosmos. So that's why we've got universe there. The esoteric title is the Great One of the Night of Time, all very appropriate to Saturn. The night, is appropriate to Saturn. The darkness, also time, we've already talked about. Oh, one thing I didn't say about Saturn in classical planets, before the discovery of Uranus, Saturn was the furthest planet out, and so as such, it had some of that significances of containing, all the orbits of all the other planets are inside of it, it's the furthest out. It's like the limit, and even now, it's the furthest planet that we can see with the naked eye, right? So it still has some of the significance of limitations and boundaries. Okay, so other stuff in the card here. We see this kind of wheel grid around the central figure. Now this is the wheel of the zodiac, and it's divided here into 72 sections. So that would be like 5-degree divisions of the zodiac. And the number 72, there's a bunch of important things about the number 72. One is the Shem Hamfarash, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is a kind of 72-fold name of God that's sort of complex, and we don't have time to go into it really here. The green color here in the background is the green of Earth. Now it's a little more of a sea green sort of in this card, but there's definitely the intention in this card to make the Earth something bright and shining, not like dark and dead. And so we see that the green of fertility and of life. In the background, right behind the figures there, excuse me, we see a kind of sort of twisted topological shape there. Crowley sort of talks about this as representing the beginning of the 10 Sephiroth, though in a kind of secret way. I'm not really sure what he means there, but the thing it makes me think of, and I feel like I've heard another author talk about this idea as well, that this sort of twisted topological shape makes a lot of sense for, kind of like Einsteinian or like modern physics, where we know that the shape of the universe itself may be something much more complex than, like the idea that you have like 3 dimensions wrapped around higher dimensions, or that, the universe itself is like finite but unbounded. And there's lots of different models and shapes proposed, in modern physics and cosmology. So I think that's kind of part of the idea here as well, is a more modern understanding of the shape of the universe. All right, so the dancing figure in the center. Actually, I'm going to jump back to the card for a second here. So you can see that she's got this I don't know, kind of scarf or mantle or something like that coming down from the front of her, and it's concealing her genitals there. And so I don't know where this idea gets started. This would be an interesting thing to look into, but there becomes a tradition that like the kind of secret of this card is that she's actually like hermaphrodite, and that it's concealing a penis there, which is, again, I don't know where that idea comes from, but there is that idea. And so here in this card, instead of, so the woman dancing here becomes Nuit, right? The goddess of the infinite universe, the goddess of the midnight, the stars, the night sky, all of that, right? And the indigo color of Saturn could be thought of as like the color in the black as well, the color of the night sky, which again isn't something to be sort of malefic or frightening, but is the body of the star goddess. But now instead of the sort of scarf mantle thing there, now we have a serpent here, and so we can think of this as a representation of the god Hadit, who's portrayed as a serpent, and also is kind of like her phallus in a sense, the creative generative power, or the male complement to her. We also have in the kind of top off to the right there, we see an eye. We think of this again as like the eye of Shiva, the eye of creation and destruction, like we saw in the Tower card. Though also, eye is one of the meanings of Ayin, which is, Capricorn, which is one of Saturn's signs. So there's an interesting connection here between, the card attributed to Saturn and the card for Capricorn. And you can also see that the rays emanating from the eye there are also turning into a sickle, which is the weapon of Saturn. And I think this is a really good card, I think, I mean, all of them are, but, this is a good card to meditate on. There's a lot going on in it. And I think there's also a lot of kind of deep things being expressed here. I mean, there's something, sort of joyful and alive going on here. She's like dancing. So there's a real like joy being expressed, but we still see the sickle of Saturn, and the idea of death and limitation at the same time. So I think there's a lot of deep stuff that could be unpacked here about the nature of the universe, the nature of created world, the nature of impermanence, but the joy of life and the joy of being in the world, even though we know that it involves suffering and loss and eventually death, that we still engage in that in a joyful and ecstatic way. I think a lot of that comes through this card. So, oh wow, we've been talking about this card for this path for like 50 minutes, but this was really like almost 2 paths. Whereas, last time we saw spirit as a kind of secondary sort of thing, not as important, especially not for practical work. Here we really have 2 things that are very important for practical work, Saturn and Earth. So this is almost a real like double path. But yeah, and so again, we have these ideas with Saturn and with Tav, sorry, not with Saturn, yeah, but with Tav as the final letter. And then, we can compare that with Aleph as the first letter. Crowley talks about the idea that, that both Aleph and Tav represent the beginning and the end are nothing, right? Everything comes from nothing and returns to nothing. But they're 2 different nothings. Aleph is like the nothing before manifestation, and then this is the nothing of complete manifestation, which is also one of the ideas of Nuit, right? Is that she's absolutely everything, but she is also nothing. And that's some deep stuff about Crowley's kind of mathematical metaphysics and the idea of the zero and all that connection. Okay, so let's wrap up. I've got a few other things I want to show you here. So that's it. So we've gone through all 22 letters here. Now, I've been showing you as we've gone through each one, we saw each path colored, but here's all 22 paths colored. So again, this is just an image of if you've been through the series, up to this point, either live or in the recording, you've heard me talk for about half an hour or more on each one of these paths. So congratulations. So this is all the stuff we've got here. I did want to use this as a jumping off point to make a couple other points and to do a little bit of a kind of summary and wrap up here. One is that, so these are the king scale colors, of course. And if you're just sort of looking at this, it can be a little confusing to try to see like patterns and things like that here. And we've got some colors that appear, we've got blue appearing more than once. We've got violet appearing more than once. We've got a few different shades of green, a couple different shades of yellow, different shades of orange, different reds. And yeah, it can be a little confusing to look at. And that will happen, I think, if you try to look at least in many cases, if you try to look at like the 22 letters, the 22 paths as like a division of, everything into like 22 categories. I think what may sometimes be more useful is to think rather that we have 3 different types of division. The mother letters divide everything into either 3, 4, or 5. The double letters divide everything into 7. And then the single letters divide everything into 12. So what we can do is kind of narrow our focus, right? And look at, this is just the 3 mother letters. So that's Aleph at the top, Mem in the middle, and then Shin at the bottom. And we see that their color scales are red, blue, and yellow, the 3 primary colors. And then we can also look at just the double letters. And so we see here we've got the spectrum. We've got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet attributed to the 7 planets. And then we can also look at the 12 single letters, again, dividing up the color wheel into 12 parts. And so to see that this also, I think, explains, some of these overlaps. It is that the spectrum is being divided, into 3, into 7, and then into 12. Right. So yeah, that's why you get the overlap there. But it's like finer levels of division. So sometimes in thinking about attributions, it can be helpful to kind of limit to one of the categories. And also, I just wanted to return to those 3 categories of mothers, doubles, and singles. Obviously, before looking at the paths individually, we spent 3 classes looking at those 3 categories. Now you could really kind of go back. This class could kind of run as a loop where there's this idea, I think I've talked about this before, the idea of like a hermeneutic circle, where if you have a group of things, you can't understand the entire group unless you understand, the components of it. Or you can't understand like an entire, like a work of like literature or something like that unless you understand, the components of it, the chapters of it, even the individual words. But you also can't understand the individual things unless you already understand the whole. So there's a little bit of a paradox of like having to understand the parts, you have to understand the whole, but to understand the whole, you have to understand the parts. And so what this means in practice is that we get this sort of circle that we kind of cycle around between the whole and the parts. So now we started with looking at the bigger groupings and then went to the smaller groupings. But now that we've looked at the individual paths, we could then go back with all that knowledge and all those mythological images and correspondences and everything else that we've built up. You could go back and now look at the three mother letters again and be able to understand those three things and that group of three in a lot more depth than we could before we had done that. So that's just a kind of suggestion for study of moving back and forth between larger groups and individuals, and then just sort of continually doing that. And so the more you understand the whole, the more you understand the parts, and then the more you understand the parts, the more you understand the whole. And that can just continue, and your knowledge can just sort of spiral deeper and deeper. I just wanted to show you this. Now, we've been following the paths, from the top down. We've been going in alphabetical order, which is like the order of creation. But the paths in practical workings are very often, the paths are traversed in the opposite direction, where you're starting at the bottom and then ascending upward along the tree. And so this is the serpent of wisdom. That ascends the tree and is a map of like the path of initiation and the path of spiritual attainment. So I just, although, it made, I think, more sense to go in alphabetical order, we could have, in a way, presented this class in the opposite order, where we started with Tav and ended with Aleph, and that would be a kind of ascensional pattern, where you're starting at the bottom and then rising upwards. And so the serpent of wisdom follows the paths upwards. Now, the serpent of wisdom pairs with the lightning flash or the flaming sword, which you can also see represented in the card, which represents the creation, the descent of the creative power through the 10 emanations or the 10 sephiroth. So the serpent of wisdom is like following the 22 paths upwards, and then the flaming sword or the lightning flash is the 10 sephiroth downwards. And so I'm going to do a series on the sephiroth, maybe starting in August. We'll see. Yeah, look out for an announcement on that. But when we do that class, we can talk about the lightning flash. So there's a little bit of a kind of preview for that. And also just showing one of the ways that like the paths are employed in like practical work. As if anybody has any other comments, we've got half an hour. I've got a few more things to show you, but not a huge amount. So if anybody has any, sort of bigger kind of questions or comments or observations, or just wants to like share their experience or something like that of this entire series, now is the time to do it. So I'm happy to even get a little off topic, return to something, that we saw in previous weeks or whatever. So feel free to jump in with anything at all that you've got here. Let's see, I don't even remember what the next slide is. Let's find out. Oh, right. So I want to show you just two examples of the way that your knowledge of these paths and your knowledge of the correspondences and symbols, both the way that you can use those to decipher magical texts and the way that language is deployed for expressive purposes in all magical texts, but especially in the Thelemic holy books. Ryan's coming here, sort of like the liberating and manifesting current in yoga. I'm not super familiar with exactly what you're referring to, but liberating and manifesting would definitely be very good keywords for those two ideas, certainly. Okay, so this is from, and we're just going to look at one verse from Liber 65. So this is Liber 65, Liber Cordis Cincti Serpenti, which means the heart, the book of the heart girt with the serpent, under the figure Adonai. And we just saw Adonai as a divine name, for Earth. Adonai is also a name very frequently used to refer to, like, the holy guardian angel. Adonai, So that there's that significance as well. And in this particular book, Adonai is definitely being used as a holy guardian angel symbol rather than something about earth. Okay, so in chapter 5, verse 14, we read, "All this while did Adonai pierce my being with his sword that hath 4 blades, the blade of the thunderbolt, the blade of the pylon, the blade of the serpent, the blade of the phallus." Yeah, something Lord, right? Yeah, Adonai means Lord. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, right. Okay. So now you need some kind of either you pick this up from our Crow's commentaries, or you just sort of have the insight that these 4 blades here that are being described. The 4 blades of this sword are going to correspond to the 4 letters that spell the name Adonai. So we can then try to think about how this happens. So our first letter is Aleph, and so that's probably when you're kind of investigating these things, you see a group of 4, you could think like, oh, do these 4 things correspond with the elements, or do they correspond with, you think about different groups of 4. But in this text, and especially because it's under the figure of Adonai, the 65 in Liber 65, Adonai sums to the value of 65. So we know that this is an extremely important formula there. And so that might tip you off that the 4-lettered name Adonai is what's being referred to here. So then we can start to investigate and think, okay, do these 4 things, correspond with these letters somehow? So we've got thunderbolt and Aleph. And we remember that Aleph is the thunderbolt by shape. The thunderbolt is another name being used here for like the swastika or the Thor's hammer, the Philfot cross, right? So the Aleph is the thunderbolt by shape. And then we've got the blade of the pylon. Now, in modern usage, pylon refers to those like big towers with the high tension lines on them. But in Egypt, the context of like Egypt, the pylon are these big gates at the entrance to Egyptian temples. And so if you remember that the letter Daleth means door, this is a pylon is a kind of door, and a door to a temple, but a big, huge, massive, grand door or a portal. When we looked at the Empress card attributed to Daleth, we talked about some of that significances of portal, the portal into the supernals and all those kind of ideas. And so that's being, sort of poetically called the pylon here. There's obviously the Egyptian temple reference and all that coming in as well. Let's see. And then we've got the blade of the serpent. We remember Nun is associated, with Scorpio, and one of the cherubic animals for Scorpio is the serpent, right? Let's see, and then the blade of the phallus. And so finally we've got the letter Yod. And when we looked at Yod and the Hermit card, we talked about the idea of Yod, especially as the Yod of Tetragrammaton, representing the father of Tetragrammaton. This is the kind of male generative potency in its highest form, right? So the blade of the phallus. So you can see how those 4 meanings are a kind of like spelling or an interpretation of the name Adonai. And then obviously I've just written Adonai in big letters down there at the bottom to help you, kind of follow along. Let's see, Kristen has a question. She says in Liber L, Nuit refers to earth as her heart and tongue. Does the heart reference in Cordis Cincti Serpenti also refer to earth? No. So the image of like the heart, well, I mean, okay, I'm not saying no. You could interpret it that way. I don't think that's like the main way of understanding it. I don't think that's how Crowley would have understood it, at least not primarily. The heart girt with the serpent is a symbol actually from like the Greco-magical papyri and the headless rite that becomes, like Liber Samek and all of that. It has the image of a heart girt with the serpent. And so the heart would be like like your heart, and all the associations of the heart, the heart of the adept, and then the serpent is like the holy guardian angel who like binds around that heart, and that symbol is really developed over the course of Liber 65. Though if you this connection that you're referring to about from Liber L about like the my heart and my tongue that Nuit says there, if you wanted to try to make a connection there, that could be a really interesting thing to do, but I don't think that's the primary reference. But good question. And I mean, I think looking for those types of connections, sometimes you'll notice like a word used in two different holy books or in two different places, and you'll think like, oh, maybe there's a connection here, and then you can try investigating it. And so I'm trying to give you some of the ways that you can start doing that. And sometimes that'll be fruitful, and sometimes that will not be. In my own Kabbalistic investigations, I probably, I find, oh, maybe there's something here, and maybe 20% of the time I actually find something. But sometimes I work out something and it doesn't quite work, or I can't quite get the symbols to match up, or I can't quite understand like a connection, and then maybe months or sometime later I get some new piece of evidence that sort of unlocks something that I wasn't able to get earlier. So just starting that type of thinking, kind of exactly like you were doing, Kristen, of looking for symbols that appear in more than one place, and then thinking, oh, how are these connected? Do they have the same meaning? Are they two shades of the same meaning? I think that's exactly the right type of thinking and type of approach here. All right, so then I've got a second example for you here. This is from another Thelemic holy book, a little more of an obscure and maybe less known one. This is Liber A'ash. So let's see, I'll kind of try to maybe walk through like a way of interpreting it here. And again, we're just going to look at one verse that's particularly relevant, though all the names, the name of the book and the other parts of the title there are all really relevant. So let's say we're coming to this cold. We've never read this before, we've never studied it, we're not really sure what it's about or what kind of symbols it's going to employ. And we have some basic Kabbalistic knowledge, but we're not like experts in Hebrew or anything like that. So it's Liber A'ash. Maybe we're not. Sounds like a Hebrew word, but not sure what it means. So it's Liber A'ash. Well means or. It's like an alternate title. Or Capricorni pneumatici. And so maybe we look this up and we find that Capricorn. We got the word Capricorn there. Literally means goat, and is also the name of the constellation Capricorn. We know that Capricorn is attributed to the letter Ayin, to the tarot card, the devil, and we've got all those associations built up with Capricorn and with the goat and all that. And then this word pneumatici here, from the Greek, I think pneumatikos or pneumatikos, that I think it literally means like wind or air. Though it can also mean breath. And then we also know that images of, like air and especially breath can also be associated with spirit. So Capricorn and pneumatici could mean something like, the wind goat or the goat of breath or the goat of spirit, something like that. We're not entirely sure what's going on. And then it's also subfigura, like under the figure, 370. Now, maybe 370 doesn't particularly mean anything to us, so we could look it up in 777. And one of the things we would find in 777, if we did that, is a word spelled Ayin Shin, which would be pronounced A'ash, and it means creation. So now we've found out, what A'ash meant by looking up the number 370 in 777. So this is Liber A'ash is the book of creation, or the goat of the spirit under the figure 370. Now, when we're reading through the book, we'll eventually it's not a very long text. It's about 4, maybe 5 pages long. It's a difficult one, though. It's worth reading, but it's definitely a complicated text. And we'll come to verse 17. And we read, actually, let's back up a little bit. So, we've got this word Ayin Shin, right? And we know that it means creation, but we might also just try to generate some of our, bring up some of our known correspondences into mind, right? So we said that Ayin, associated with Capricorn, with the devil of the tarot. We know that it means eye. We've got all those things, right? And then Shin, we know that Shin means tooth. It can be attributed to fire or to spirit. the aeon in the tarot, right? We've got all these significances built up. And so if we've got that kind of just in the back of our heads as we're reading through, we'll come to verse 17, and we read, "Now shalt thou adore me, who am the eye and the tooth, the goat of the spirit, the Lord of creation. I am the eye in the triangle, the silver star that ye adore." Okay, so some of this might ring a bell. I am the eye and the tooth, right? That's ayin and shin, eye and tooth. The goat of the spirit, right? We already saw that as one of our possible interpretations of Capricorni Pneumaticae. Now we also see that it's coming out of these two letters, right? Ayin, Capricorn, goat, and then shin can be attributed to the element of spirit. So this is, again, a kind of the eye and the tooth, the goat and the spirit. Those are both like interpretations of these two letters, ayin, shin. The Lord of creation, the word Ash, means creation. I am the eye in the triangle. Now you go, okay, eye. We already knew that meant that that ayin, is the symbol of the eye, but the eye in the triangle. How does shin mean triangle? And so you could kind of think about that. Think about some of the symbols of shin, and you might remember that shin attributed to the element of fire. And what's the glyph for the element of fire? It's an upright triangle. Right. So again, the eye in the triangle here is now another interpretation of ayin shin. And so doing this, we've now explained a lot of the title and this verse, right? And now that last part, the silver star that ye adore, I'll leave that to your own meditation. But just a kind of demonstration of how these symbols appear in holy books and how they're used, and also hopefully, how you can go about starting to interpret some of those things. As you're working through them. And that's a first kind of entry into the holy books. I do want to comment about the holy books and about like interpreting these symbols, that in understanding, or kind of understanding the Kabbalistic symbols, that's where you start, right? When you understand, like with this verse here, all the stuff that we've just gone through, those meanings, that's not like, oh, that's the answer, we figured it out, all done, puzzle solved. Now that we've figured those things out, now we can start the real work of interpretation. If you're not getting the Kabbalistic symbols, you're really not getting anything at all. But just getting the Kabbalistic symbols is the way that you enter into this stuff. And now you can think about these symbols and reflect on them and, compare the symbols in that verse and in the title to what's happening in the rest of the book. And now you can really start the work of interpretation. One of my pet peeves is when people, especially you see this with the Book of the Law, people are like, oh, I solved the Book of the Law. And you're like, no, it's not a thing to be solved, right? I mean, there are certainly puzzles and codes and symbols that need to be, teased out and worked out and interpreted. But it's not just like a cipher, right? It's a lot more than that. And understanding those symbols, again, is just the beginning and just the entranceway into a deeper understanding, not the end of that understanding. Okay, so we got just a few minutes left. Again, I'd be if anybody wants to make any comments just about what you're. I know a few people did at the start of the class already. Say a few things about the series, but any just sort of reflections and just what your kind of experience has been like, or anything you've been thinking about, or any insights that you've had. I'd be happy to hear them in the last 15 minutes here. But while that's going on, I just wanted to show you a little bit of bonus content from that. It's a nice kind of showcase of, we've been looking obviously at the tarot trumps, from the Thoth deck and Lady Frida Harris's really like amazing work. And so I wanted to just show you some artwork of hers. This isn't her artwork that you're seeing on the screen yet. So I just wanted to show some artwork of hers that's not very widely seen. And these, even if you have seen it, these images are the images I'm going to show are probably going to be kind of nicer, higher quality images than you've seen before. So what these are going to be are Masonic tracing boards. Let's see, how do I want to explain this? So in the 3 degrees of Blue Lodge Masonry, there's a tradition of making these like tracing boards, which express like or kind of encapsulate the primary symbols of those 3 Masonic degrees. And so she was a Mason, obviously in co-masonry, masonry that allowed women. which is much more, I don't know exactly, I mean, I don't know if anyone from the UK is here and could comment on whether that's still prevalent now, but I know that co-masonry is much more common like in Europe than it is in the United States, which is unfortunate, for the United States, but I'm not sure what it's like in the UK. But yeah, but she was a Mason, and she also did a set of tracing boards. Now the tracing boards, although they all kind of contain a lot of the same symbols, there's not really a lot of uniformity, and they range from very simple to much more complex and much more artistic. So what you're looking at here is just kind of two semi-random examples of tracing boards. A lot of times they were done. These tracing boards get made all the way back into like the 18th century. So a lot of times you would have like just a local, either a member of the like a local lodge, or an artist that they knew or something like that would just make like a custom set of tracing boards just for the use of that lodge. And those are different traditions and things like that, and it evolves over time. But there's a lot of just variance from like lodge to lodge. So here are two different versions of the first degree tracing board. This is the entered apprentice degree. And so on the left, you see like a very simplified one, and then on the right, a very simple kind of just schematic, display of some of the primary symbols. And we're not going to go into what the meaning of these symbols are. Not super relevant, and would take way too much time. And I'm also not an expert in Masonic symbolism. But you can see how, in those two images, you've got like the three pillars, you've got this ladder, you've got like the line, the level, and the compass. The sun and the moon. You're right. You've got a bunch of symbolism. The checkered floor. You see that the kind of sides of the image are labeled north, south, east, and west. So you can see how the same symbols are being presented in two different ways. And then here's Lady Frida Harris's version of that tracing board. And so you can see the way she's taken those same symbols, but she's done it in her style. Which I think is so cool, right? You see the pillars, the Masonic tools, the checkerboard, but now the space has become. You see the sun and moon on the left and right, above the left and right pillars there. And so you see all those, the way that she's taken those images and transformed them. I think. If you look at like the way she takes kind of traditional tarot imagery and transforms them, you can see how she's kind of doing the same thing to Masonic imagery here, which I think is really cool. All right, and then here's a couple of examples from the Masonic second degree tracing boards. This is the Fellowcraft degree. And so on the left, you see, again, sort of a simple one, and on the right, a more complex artistic one. And so we see, these symbols of this kind of winding, curving staircase. You got this gateway of two pillars that it's surmounted by like the celestial globe and the terrestrial globe. We see a few figures. We see this ear of grain there. We see the G within the triangle radiating in both of those, though it's been adapted into a full kind of artistic scene there on the right. I see some comments coming in. I'll jump back to those after I've shown you the tracing boards. All right, and then that's her version of them. So again, you can see the way that she's using these same core symbols. You got the two pillars there, and the celestial and terrestrial globes, and then this winding staircase. But again, she's transformed it and totally made it her own. Right, the stairs now are like a spiral. She's really bending space and geometry in a very modern way. You can compare this to a lot of other modern art, Cubism, and even some surrealist kind of images and things like that. But the way that she utilizes geometry and symbols, I think is so cool. So that's a really neat one. All right, and then here's two examples of a third degree tracing board. This is a degree of Master Mason. So again, you see a kind of simpler one on the right, simpler one on the left, and then a little more of a colored artistic one on the right. You can see some of the basic images there. That the shape there is a coffin, right? We've got the death's head and some other symbols there. All right, and then that is Lady Frida Harris's version of it. So this one's really wild. She's taken that basic image and now turned it into kind of like a dodecahedron, I think that would be. And she's also transformed, the coffin has been transformed into the five sides of those figures. But you see the same symbols. You see that the death's head appearing on several of the faces. And you see other symbols that she's bringing in here as well. but it's got this same kind of like warped, twisted geometry, and they all have this sense of like motion, right? Like it seems to be in the process of transforming and in the process of movement, which I think we saw in the other two cards as well. That they seem, kind of active and yeah. So I just thought those were really great, showcases of her artwork. And things that aren't very, very commonly seen. Okay, great. So let's, I'll read a couple comments here. Let's see. Oh yeah, Ryan's commenting that he's been reading the Book of Thoth as a supplement. Yeah, and the Book of Thoth is. I was just talking to somebody about the Book of Thoth recently. That's a book that I've read that book, I think, cover to cover, like twice, maybe 3 times through, and then there's certain sections of it that I've definitely read more than that. That's a really, really dense and deep book with so much in it. Every time I read that book, I find things where I'm like, that paragraph wasn't here last time. There's so much in it, and to continue returning to it. So hopefully, I like that idea of this class as a kind of. I was thinking about this class more as like a companion to 777, but as a companion to the Book of Thoth, it works very nicely. And of course, I've got a picture of Thoth here. This is the image, if you remember from the very first class, this was the first image I showed. So I like symmetry, so it's also the last images I'm going to show. And we talked about this idea of the mythological idea of the tarot, as the Book of Thoth, and also Thoth as the god of both writing and of magic. I think has been kind of the perfect deity to sort of preside over this series, right? We've talked a lot about literally writing and letters and alphabets and symbol and number, but all magical things and for magical purposes, and that's all things that Thoth presides over. All right, let's see. Jason says that he's noticed all sorts of things pop up in his daily life. Some of them are just personal significances. Some of them made his day more interesting. And that's starting to recognize those symbols, in the world is a really great exercise. Even if you're being kind of skeptical about, how that works, how symbols appear in the material world and what's meaningful and what's not. Even if you just like consider it a game, just an exercise to help your learning, that's still super valuable. And you may experience at times, I don't know if this is true for you, Jason, but you may experience at times that what is just sort of a game or an exercise sometimes crosses into being something more than that. In preparing these classes, I've had a few interesting experiences as well, where close to around the time that I was preparing, either classes or right after giving one, something really closely associated with one of the paths that we've been talking about has appeared in my own life, and that may be just because I'm more sensitized to those things and I'm noticing them, or I think there could very also be a kind of magical or synchronistic understanding of that. Especially with one in particular that I had involving the idea of the fool, where I was a bit of a fool in a situation, or made myself kind of look foolish, but I also learned a lesson out of that, and that was just after giving the class on the fool. But yeah, so both a good exercise and also an entryway into some deeper and more magical things. I mean, this is a magical language, and so the idea that we've been employing this weekly, and I have been spending hours putting these things together and everything. It's not surprising that would have actual effects. I mean, again, I'm not doing these in sort of full ritualized way, but they are still magical symbols, and I've through practice and meditation, I've internalized these things, and so I'm lighting up and activating, those parts of my psyche, and those resonate with things, beyond the individual psyche. See what else we got here. So Latimer was saying it was a lot to take in. Yeah, and I think I was saying before I started the recording, don't worry about getting all of this stuff. Especially if you're newer to it, the things to actually try to remember are, recognize the Hebrew letters and then be able to, at least in a simplified form. You don't need to become an expert calligrapher or anything like that, but be able to, draw a simplified form of the letters, be able to recognize them, be able to name them, know their basic, the Yetziratic attributions. like, for example, with Tav, like what would be the core things to know about Tav? Know what the letter looks like and how to draw it. Know that it means cross. Again, I gave you some expanded meanings and things like that, but just that core meaning is all you really need to memorize. I was just trying to add some depth. Know that it means cross, know what it looks like, know that it has the value of 400, know that it can be attributed to both Saturn and to Earth, know that it's attributed to the universe in the tarot. That's a good place to start, really, just sort of tarot attributions, the Yetziratic attributions, to planets, elements, and signs, the basic meaning of the letter, what the letter looks like, and its numerical value. That's a really, really good foundation. But in the other sort of stuff, although there was a lot to take in, hopefully, even if you didn't get every little bit, every detail, you maybe saw some of the logic of how the associations happen. And so maybe you have a better understanding of what correspondences are and how they work. And so now going forward, when you're whether you're doing a ritual or just studying or working with 777, having gone through this, you'll be able to sort of make a little bit more sense. And 777 might be something a little bit more alive and less of just table after table after table of words, something very kind of dry, but as an actual like living system. Hopefully this has been a little bit of a guide to that, but definitely don't worry about like memorizing or getting all the details or anything like that. Yeah, good. Yeah, I think as I was saying, I'm glad this has been a nice thing for people during our strange COVID times here. This has been a nice thing to do during the plague, both as kind of project to have, and as something as a kind of anchoring sort of thing in the midst of disruption. So I'm glad that's been nice for people. Yeah, Patrick, I like the idea of cognitive hooks to hang correspondences on. I don't know if you were using that word hook specifically as a Jungian reference, but Jung talks about the archetypes as being like a hook, where the hook itself it's kind of like an invisible hook. So the hook itself doesn't have like content or something. We can only really know the hook by what we hang on it. So the idea is like, you have like an archetype, and then, we're talking about Thoth here, right? You've got an archetype, and then we can hang, the Greek god Hermes, and the Roman Mercury, and the planet Mercury, and then the Greek god, or the Egyptian god Thoth. We can hang different deities from the traditions, different symbols, different colors, all of those things get hung onto that hook. And that gives us some sense of even if we can't approach the archetypes directly because they, transcend the rational mind's ability to comprehend, by looking at what can be hung on those hooks, we can gain a sense of them. I'm not familiar with that mnemonic technique, Kristen. I'll have to look that up. But I can see how that type of thing could be applied for mnemonic purposes, certainly. Okay, yeah. So great, everybody. Unless there are any other questions or comments, that does it for our series. So yeah, thanks again. Let's see, what do we got coming up? There's not going to be I thought we might be able to actually meet in person in July here in Sacramento, but that's not going to happen. So I'll do just kind of a one-off webinar. Now that class was scheduled to be on July 6th. I think I'm going to push that back a week, but stay tuned for an announcement on that. And I'm not entirely sure what the topic will be yet. So we'll meet at least once in July. And then, like I was saying, I'd like to do a kind of complement series to this on the Sephiroth. So maybe starting in I don't know, like mid or maybe in August at some point. But yeah, look out for announcements about that too. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording now.